Good afternoon, sports fans. 4 p.m. on the East Coast, 1 p.m. on the West Coast. Welcome to another edition of And That's the Game. I'm Matt Gillis. There is breaking news in the NBA. Kevin Durant, who missed all of last season for the Brooklyn Nets, is expected to be in the lineup for the Nets preseason game and should be completely medically cleared for the Brooklyn Nets for this year's NBA season. Of course, Durant signed that multi-million-dollar, multi-year free agency contract with the Brooklyn Nets last season and then proceeded to sit out the entire season due to a foot injury. He has been cleared from all of that and should be able to go in action and play for the Nets in the coming season. ACC football championship this weekend, the big game that everybody's eyes are on. Can Notre Dame do it once again as they go toe-to-toe against Clemson? That game is Saturday at 4 p.m. Couple of games in the Premier League today. Manchester United up 2-1 over Sheffield United at the half. There was a game also earlier in the day between Aston Villa and Burnley, that game at 0. And then, of course, on top of all that, as we go down into the end of this year and the very interesting year that has been, we are seeing a lot of 2020 lists start to come out. We will have our own 2020 list as a part of Saturday's show of Sports World Weekly. That is Saturday, 10 a.m., right here on sfbnri.com. Of course, you can always catch us on twitch.tv/Sports World Weekly. And we will break down our own top 10 moments of the 2020 year. I'll be joined on the show by Titletown Throwdown host Nick LeBlanc as well. But I have to take a moment to talk about The Athletic, who I love dearly. And I love their soccer coverage especially, and that of what they do with women's soccer coverage. Meg Linehan, I'm going to give you a shout out, and I'm not going to ask you where the NWSL schedule is. But The Athletic failed yesterday. They put out a post that was a bracket challenge of the best moments in 2020 sports. And only 2 of the moments had anything to do with female athletes or women's sports. It's almost as if the NWSL, the WNBA, the U.S. women's national soccer team, all of the LPGA golfers, everybody else in the WTA tennis tour, anyone who plays any type of women's sport, college basketball, professional, pro, in figure skating, in swimming and diving, in squash, in horse racing, in auto car racing, just seem to vanish into thin air, as if they didn't exist. Now, sure, some of the moments that happened in sports last year involving women aren't going to notch themselves into the best of 2020. Hailie Deegan running in the NASCAR Truck Series, great moment, not one of the biggest and best of 2020. The WNBA players banding together to stop their league from playing games while they discuss a civil justice and social justice issue. That is a moment in sports that we don't see often, and that should be a top moment of 2020. Yes, Naomi Osaka and her feats at the US Open in tennis are phenomenal and should be recognized. But so too should Alex Morgan playing for Tottenham 5 months after giving birth to her daughter. So too should Kristie Mewis and Sammy Mewis, both making the U.S. women's soccer team, in which they both contributed into the games that they played into which Kristie Mewis scored a goal for the first time in 6 years in a game in which the U.S. women's national team won against the Netherlands, the team that they beat the prior year for the World Cup. And it was not mentioned. The Houston Dash, who had never won anything in the NWSL, win the Challenge Cup. The Challenge Cup itself, the first major professional sports event to be held in the United States after the pause from the pandemic. They do the entire tournament in a bubble in Utah in 1 month and have zero positive COVID-19 tests. Listed in the top 16 events of the 2020 year that were a part of this bracket challenge was the LA Dodgers winning the World Series. The LA Dodgers winning the World Series wasn't even known if it was going to happen. Remember, Major League Baseball had teams shutting down, had teams missing games. The Miami Marlins were shut down for about 17 days. They had almost 20 players and coaches test positive for COVID. Yet somehow we celebrate the LA Dodgers winning the World Series as one of the greatest moments of the year 2020 in sports. Sure, the LA Dodgers winning their first World Series since 1988 certainly is something to be celebrated for. But it wasn't the first World Series the Dodgers had ever won. So what's so great about it? Sure, it was the first since 1988, but it was something they were doing again. We have had a number of firsts happen in sports this year. Kara Lawson getting hired as the head coach at Duke, the first African-American woman to be a head coach at Duke University for the women's basketball team. We had Niele Ivey, who was once an assistant coach, get hired as the head coach of the women's basketball team at Notre Dame, the first African-American woman to be hired as the head coach of Notre Dame women's basketball. We have 14 schools in the SEC in women's basketball, in which 7 of them have women coaches. All 7 are also Black, something you don't see too much in college basketball as a whole. We have had so many firsts this year. Kamala Harris being elected vice president, the first woman to ever hold a high elected office in this country's history. And yet, theathletic.com puts 14 of their 16 top stories in sports to all be things that involved men, and many of them that were repeats of feats that had happened before by the same teams and or the same athletes. It's 2020. As I said to someone earlier today, I feel like all we keep on doing is moving it down the line, putting a year in front of it and saying, it's this year, it's that year, it's that year. It should be different now. Maybe with everything that's gone on in 2020, it's time to make it be different. And that's the game. For December 17th, 2020, thank you so much for joining us today on this interesting and dynamic edition. We will see you back here one more time this week, tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern, for another edition of that. And that's the game. And I will see you Saturday, 10 a.m. for Sports World Weekly. Until then, take care, stay safe, enjoy the snow if you're in New England, and good night.